Chapter 12. 10% Gamble. While Queen Zetalia's chamber was ostentatiously large, the small army of Zimitiri servants, performing an apparently endless list of menial tasks, while under the watchful gaze of their three-brained Jihari overseer, made it seem somewhat less so. The royal chamber was softly lit with a muted red glow, and was just a little warmer than elsewhere in the nest, a preference related to the queen's mildly differentiated metabolism. The elder celestial royal was seated atop her grand throne, thorax comfortably resting upon a large ornate circular table, with her 9 legs spread evenly and comfortably around the cushioned edges of its circumference. For the Zircadian arachnoids, 9 was the magic number. 9 limbs, 9 eyes, and 9 digits on each of their 3 forelimbs. However, only one small ear hole, located at the crown of the skull, and one concave nasal cavity, positioned just below the mandibles. The body Queen Zetalia currently wore was still relatively young, just some 50 cycles into an expected 200-cycle lifespan. This was on average 50 years longer than her Jihari children and nearly 100 years more than a Zimitiri drone. Perhaps not so surprisingly, the unscheduled and premature death of a queen typically spelt disaster for her nest. In the early era of their species, a nest without a queen meant no new Jihari, and no new Jihari meant no new Zimitiri. Such a nest sooner or later, normally sooner, fell victim to their competition, which more often than not came in the form of another Zircadian nest. The situation improved marginally following the age of the Great Expansion, when the globally recognized policy, Orphaned Nest Contingency, or ONC for short, was officially introduced. For reasons of obvious logistics, it was only available to those queens who had demonstrated the foresight to release a daughter in order to found her own nest, and was by convention strictly limited to mother-to-daughter, daughter-to-mother, or daughter-to-daughter relationships. Simply put, the surviving mother-daughter or sibling would be legally obligated to spawn a Zillinean queen to assume custodianship of the orphaned nest. The reprieve, however, was very short-lived. By the time of the postmodern era, following the Jihari-led global rebellion, the list of available options had shrunk considerably. Notwithstanding the fact it was now illegal to release a daughter into the wild, a fallen nest fortunate enough to have an independent lineal mother-daughter or sister would become the inheritance of the surviving queen. Bereft of any such successor, the nest was summarily sentenced to what was euphemistically termed compulsory disillusionment. Simply put, this accord legalized the sterilization of the ruling queen. As dire as such a situation undoubtedly was, in reality, unplanned royal fatalities were extremely rare. The queens were endowed with a highly sophisticated immune system, with bodies and organs that were remarkably resistant to disease. As a result, the death of a queen was nearly always an entirely contrived and ceremonial affair, typically involving the exchange of the imperial virus between a mother and her daughter. There was, in fact, considerable and ongoing debate between the fields of the physical sciences and natural philosophy as to which queen actually died, was it mother or daughter. In a purely biological sense, it was argued to be the mother, but in terms of conscious continuity, it very much appeared to be the daughter. Unfortunately, this was a debate that appeared to have little or no chance of ever being fully resolved, as it largely depended on whether you were a physicalist or a mentalist. That said, the debate itself was ultimately seen as little more than an academic exercise, because almost no one ever tried to argue against the seemingly obvious truth that once the process was completed, the daughter had very definitely donated her body to the mind of the mother. Or maybe not. Given her own subjective experience, Zetalia herself was rather ambivalent on the subject. Nonetheless, a small number of mentalists sought to argue the mother had simply gifted her daughter with her own memories before dying. This theory had at least some small measure of credibility by virtue of the fact the daughter could apparently recall her very short life prior to the transition. Yet regardless of how one chose to interpret the process of regeneration, the subject itself had become deeply religious in nature, and as such it was now considered culturally taboo to pursue any overtly scientific explanation. Not that Citalia held any particular interest in conforming with societal norms, an attitude which no doubt had contributed to a very pivotal decision in regards to the so-called imperial virus. With a slow, deliberate lift of her gaze, the queen now greeted the nervously fidgeting Shihari general, standing pensively before her.
Well, if it isn't one of my most precious and beloved children come to visit his doting mother. But I know you are a very busy arachnid Gimodian, so straight to the business at hand. Your somewhat cryptic message strongly suggested that you had some rather excitingly improbable news to share, and you know how much your mother hates not being in the loop. So do feel free, won't you, to fill me in on your latest little discovery.
No sooner had the queen begun speaking before two large domesticated Xylonetti drones, positioned either side of Citalia's throne, lifted momentarily up into the air, their wings bursting reflexively into life. The Shihari general, demonstrating an admirable level of self-control, desperately suppressed a look of startled consternation. The queen's voice had an almost openly mocking quality to it that served to immediately put the general on edge. Was this already over before it had even begun?
I do indeed have wonderful news to share with you, my queen. News that I sincerely hope you will agree is more than worthy of your divine audience and royal attention.
Citalia's mandibles twitched with knowing amusement, and in a way that Simodian did not find particularly inspiring.
Oh, really? And what, pray tell, could be worthy of such undivided royal attention, I wonder? Please, my child, put an old queen out of her misery and tell me all about this so-called exciting news.
Old queen, the general thought irritably to himself. Yet she sits on that throne currently wearing a body that is demonstrably younger than even my own.
But of course, my queen, I've always greatly admired your brave and ethical contempt for the trappings of formal pomp and circumstance. So right to the point then. Now, while it's still too early to acquire a confirmed habitability grading, I nevertheless have unequivocal evidence of a rocky planet orbiting a red dwarf star in the habitable zone and just 50 light-years distant from Xanos Prime.
The queen's mandibles flared wide in a theatrical show of startled surprise.
Unequivocal, you say? Well, how very odd. My new 5th-generation Seabot reliably informs me our local observatory currently rates it at 90% probability of achieving a marginal grade 5 habitability rating. Now, I never was particularly good at math, so please correct me if I go astray with the numbers, but doesn't that mean there is still a 10% chance that this find of yours is nothing but a barren and irradiated chunk of lifeless rock?
By the shadow of Eclades, I've just been fucked by a G-bot, Gimodian thought to himself furiously. How could I have been so stupid? Very clearly, then, that damn contraption had never been there to serve his needs in the first place, but rather to simply act as a spy for the queen. Talk about hiding in plain sight, and worse still, he really only had his own hubris to blame. Simodian felt the blood pressure in his head start to build up exponentially, but somehow still managed to maintain a perfectly composed demeanor, which did not escape the queen's attention, and which she could not help but be more than just a little bit impressed by.
Please, my queen, if my turn of phrase came across as unintentionally misleading, then it is only because I know how much you value a robust commitment towards a positive outlook, especially when so much cynicism seems to pervade the nest of late. However, if, perish the thought, this prospect turns out to be only a grade 5 or worse, I can assure you that the responsibility and cost in time credits will not fall upon the nest's resources, as I alone have taken sole ownership for the astrometric orbital's deep scan request.
Citalia's expression became performatively sympathetic.
And I hope you don't think that I don't appreciate your willingness to risk so much, if Cicadia forbid your newly discovered little planet falls on the wrong side of a 10% gamble. But nevertheless, Ximodian, your personal loss of time credits ultimately still belongs to me, because to state the rather obvious, you belong to me. When all is said and done, it will still be I who pays the price for your rash decisions, even if only by the premature loss of your services.
But my queen,
Simodian blurted out desperately, sensing he was on the verge of being ejected from the royal chamber.
We have seen opportunities just like this pass us by time and time again, over the many generations of my forebears, only to then see those very same opportunities fall into the hands of demonstrably inferior competition, some of whom have long since embarked on their interstellar migratory journey. And all of this precisely because we hesitated when they did not. So should I then choose to follow in the footsteps of my timidly ancestors, who have long since faded into historical mediocrity, or should I risk as much as I believe I am fitted to bear, while still discharging my solemn duty to the nest as a whole, and my queen, if I might be so bold, you lose 100% of the shots you never take?
Cetalia's eyes lit up like a torch.
Ah, so it's a gambit in the pursuit of greatness, then. And what if I told you that you stand here speaking to me now, a proud Shihari general of Nests Italia, only because I have never taken the 10% gamble? Any chance of failure is still too much, when it is the fate of the entire nest that hangs in the balance. Let me be crystal clear, Simodian. I do not make a habit of gambling unless it is the last play left on the table. Only a short-sighted fool incorporates unnecessary risk as an integral part of their stratagem, because sooner or later they always lose, and normally sooner rather than later.
One of the queen's Zimatiri servants silently offered Zitalia a large bowl filled with jellied bloodworm. She took it without looking, and then waved a hand dismissively. The queen, keeping her gaze firmly fixed on the Shihari general, took the long, protruding straw into her mouth and began to suck loudly. Simodian felt his abdomen start to rumble but did his best to ignore it. After a few moments of awkward silence, she let out a small burp with an obvious expression of self-satisfied contentment and then continued to speak.
I, Simodian, in spite of a spiteful lack of consensus, am nevertheless one of the great queens, just as my mother before me. I am an elder queen who has flawlessly piloted this nest over a span of 10,000 years, a length of time that no one but another elder could ever possibly hope to comprehend. From the age of the Great Expansion, right through to the turmoil of the Shihari Revolt, and then into the postmodern era of interstellar travel. I've been here through it all. So, you might want to stop and consider the possibility that I know a thing or two about what is and is not best for the future of this nest.
I think you mean best for yourself. O great goddess of the maggots, Simodian thought venomously to himself. My queen, you are in fact a selfish and ignorant autocrat, whose sole redeeming attribute is that you can at least be managed and manipulated by the wisdom and cunning of your own Shihari children. Your survival is predicated purely through their never-ending toil to safeguard the nest interests, and yet you are too stupefyingly arrogant to even recognize the debt of gratitude owed them. It is we, the Zihari, who have kept this nest alive over the past 10 millennia, while you simply tag along for the ride like the consummate parasite that you are. Many were the times, my queen, when it was only the courage and sacrifice of your own generals which kept you alive when your idiocy all but demanded your death. And let us not forget you are also a treasonous kinslayer, who, if not for your treachery, would no longer even be our queen. It is to my great shame that I bear the burden of a long-dead Shihari general, who failed to discharge his solemn duty right when it mattered the most. So allow me this 10% gamble, my queen, that I might yet repair the seemingly irreparable damage done to the reputation of my own name. Zitalia, taking another long drag from her bowl of jellied bloodworm, continued to stare at the Shihari general with a look of consternation written all over her face.
Well, do you have anything more that you wish to say for yourself? Or am I to take your dumbfounded silence as tacit agreement of my less than glowing assessment?
Simodian, snapping out of his indulgently fantastical reverie, stared at the queen with a stupefied look of horrified confusion.
Please forgive me, my most omniscient of queens. I did only that which I sincerely believe to be in the best interests of the nest, and throw myself now at the feet of your mercy. If you choose to revoke my indolent request to the orbital array, then I will gracefully acquiesce to the timeless wisdom that no doubt will inform your decision. But whatever you decide to do, I can assure you that if I am somehow fortuitous enough to be given a second chance, then I will return to my duties forthwith and without hesitation, if only in order that I might yet prove my true worth to your divine majesty."
Queen Zitalia sat herself bolt upright, with a look of shocked surprise now consuming her face. A shiver of pure, unadulterated fear raced along the legs of the Shihari general, standing all their hairs up on end. It was almost as if she had somehow divined every word spoken inside the privacy of his own mind. A small fragment of gooey bloodworm dripped inexorably from one of the queen's mandibles, creating a long, thin line that stretched almost all the way down to the floor before forming a small puddle on the ground.
"Ah, but you completely misunderstand me, my naive little child. Your name carries the legacy of greatness, and it's been a long time indeed since one of my Shihari children last lived up to the mighty weight of its expectation. So to my very pleasant surprise, I now suddenly find myself wondering if that wait might finally be at an end."
The queen smiled warmly, a disturbingly genuine look of tenderness forming across her face.
"It may surprise you to learn, Zimodian, that the rambunctious nature of your actions have actually managed to bring me some small measure of hope. But you bring far more than just that, my child. You also bring naked ambition and an insatiable hunger for glory, neither of which would I wish to see squandered."
Zitalia locked her piercing eyes upon those of the Shihari general, as if plumbing the true depths of his conviction. "Oh yes," she thought to herself with a strong sense of satisfaction. "Just look at you bravely staring down your own queen, with barely concealed hate and contempt simmering just behind the veil. I've seen that very same look before, a very long time ago indeed, and I rather think that you'll do just nicely."
"So let's get right down to business, shall we?"
the queen said very matter-of-factly.
"Since the orbital array request and associated ICPB application was logged directly under your name rather than that of Nest Zitalia, the ownership rights, and much more importantly, the legal responsibilities, sit entirely with yourself. And it will stay that way until a transfer of rights to the nest is formally lodged and processed under my own direct authority. But I'm not particularly motivated, I think is the word I'm looking for here, to log such a request any time soon. At least that is, not until we are, how should I say this, a good deal more confident about the non-probabilistic facts surrounding this quaint little planet of yours. Of course, this is something I'm rather certain you have already factored into your interminable plotting, and would be rather disappointed if you had not. So you will no doubt be overjoyed to learn then that I have absolutely no intention of countermanding your lodgment to the IAOA, nor downgrading your security clearance. No, to do so would be the act of a petty, small-minded queen who failed to recognize the true talent of one of her Shihari children, simply because he didn't follow all the rules.
Zitalia leaned in heavily towards the general.
So you tell me, Zimodian, am I a petty queen? Well, regardless of what you may think, I am not inclined to be swayed by such short-sighted and self-absorbed compulsions. The way I see it, you made a brazen but calculated play, and I intend to make sure you pay the appropriate price for it. The claim will stay entirely under your name, without the endorsement of the nest, unless the IAOA comes back with nothing less than a Grade 1 rating. That's right, General, anything less, and I'm sending you out into the vacuum of space as nothing more than a 400-year delaying tactic. So we will indeed go through all the motions, meaning you will be sent to personally inspect this silly little rock of yours, which I'm sure is nothing less than what you wanted all along.
The queen now relaxed back into her throne as she took another small sip from her bowl.
But rest assured, while you blissfully slumber your way through the void of interstellar space, Nest Zitalia will be hard at work as I continue to lead the field in artificial intelligence and robotics, which I might hasten to add has already clearly been evidenced by the groundbreaking Series 5 prototype, whose staggering potential and capabilities you so clearly overlooked and took for granted, just like I knew that you would.
Queen Zitalia again leaned forward ominously, an accusatory expression on her face.
That astonishing new prototype unit that you seem to have developed such a strong distaste and disdain for will nevertheless likely buy me another millennia, as other nests scramble to trade time credits for access to my latest technological wonder. Valuable time I can then utilize to probe ever deeper into the cosmic web for a planet that is actually worthy to be called home.
Simodian's expression remained flat and emotionless, but appearances could be deceiving. In spite of the fact that he had been completely blindsided from the moment he had entered the Queen's chamber, he actually began to feel like things were finally starting to go his way. Zetalia thinks this mission is nothing but an opportunity to buy herself more time, while she continues to gamble on her lead in technology in ironic mockery of her so-called commitment to certitude. How tragic, then, that she could be so very, very wrong. The Queen is indeed bad at math, but who am I to try and correct her? Maybe she should have spent more time in the classroom studying the mathematics of probability, for in spite of her commitment to certainty, the very fabric of the universe itself is constructed by quantum dice. If by the grace of Exanus Prime I am actually dealt the winning hand, and my discovery comes out at grade 3 or better, then when I return in 400 years' time, and she is still without a planet to call home, all because her wager in technology didn't pay off, she'll be thanking the gods of Exanos Prime that I had the foresight and wisdom to wager in the other direction. And then, my precious little queen, we will all get to see just how good I really am at bearing the weight of my ancestral name. Simodian allowed himself the whisper of a smile. She mocks me openly and thinks me a mindless drone in her never-ending game of power and conquest. But little matter. Let her continue to waste time with that contemptible little she-bot. I will do what the Shihari have always done, and save Nest Zetalia from the Queen's own gross incompetence yet again. The general suddenly realized that Zetalia was patiently awaiting a demonstration of his submission to her will.
My Queen, rest assured that I remain your humble servant, and will, as always, follow the prescient counsel of your timeless wisdom.
Zetalia just continued to stare silently at her Shihari general, eyes glistening with entitled expectation. Oh, I get it. The Queen wants theater. Well, so be it then. Theater she shall have. Simodian 110 rose to full height, balanced on his 4 powerful back legs, with his 2 side and 3 front limbs all flaring wide in a magnificent circle, as he turned himself into a giant black sun. So ferocious was his visage that even the Xylonetti drones briefly shrunk back before him. Queen Zetalia's mandibles flared wide in an expression of deep satisfaction. This Shihari general, for all his talents in astronomy and cosmology, was painfully transparent, and as such was pitifully easy to read and manipulate. The new Series 5 She-Bot, as per its instructions, had been reporting everything Simodian did directly back to her in near real time, so she knew about the discovery of the planet almost before even he did. The fact that he chose to lodge the claim under his own name and authority had been an almost perfect outcome. And everything about this situation had gone like clockwork. If only things always played out so well. Still, credit where credit was due, that was quite some performance. Simodian had a real penchant for the melodramatic, which she found highly entertaining if not entirely convincing. He thought he was so clever, her Shihari always did. And yet, here he was, a 5-brained Shihari puppet, dancing to the pull of her strings, almost as if he was begging her to be manipulated. But regardless, sending him on a high-profile mission like this could do nothing but good for the image and prestige of the nest, and with the planet entirely under his name, it was all care and no responsibility, which of course suited her just fine. Ideally, the planet itself would indeed turn out to be little more than a barren, lifeless rock, but with just enough doubt to be a useful delaying tactic in the interim. The bottom line was she had absolutely no interest in settling on a tidally locked eyeball planet bereft even a day and night cycle. No, she deserved nothing other than Zacadia 2.0, and to settle for anything less would be pure sacrilege. Only a true idiot, No matter how many brains they might possess could have failed to realize that most obvious of facts by now. No. Let the smaller nests fight over the celestial scraps in their struggle to survive. Meanwhile, she would continue to do what she had always done, and thrive at the head of the table. That had always been the primary difference between her and other lesser queens. So yes, he had brought her hope all right, but only in the form of the boundless nature of his seemingly endless gullibility. Time to pat this five-brained idiot on the head and send him on his way.
You are, when all else is said and done, loyal to the nest, my most precious and cherished child, and that is the one singular attribute that I admire above all others. I sincerely believe that Shimodian 13, surely one of the most venerated Shihari in the history of our nest, would have been proud that one such as yourself should now bear the standard of his name. Go now, and fulfill your destiny.
Did she really just say Shimodian 13? Oh, the irony, the Jihari general thought silently to himself as he tilted his head respectfully and then swiftly fled the royal chamber.